Hey everybody, today we're going to be talking about balancing in Dead by Daylight. I thought we should all talk about this because I've been on numerous forums and I see a lot of people giving their advice and their opinions on Dead by Daylight, specifically Reddit and Facebook, and I think it would benefit everyone to take a step back and look in and think about the thought process that goes into balancing a game like Dead by Daylight. Now, before we start, I want to say two things. One, I'm not a dev. Okay, you guys might think I'm a dev because of the way I'm talking. I'm not a dev, and I want to make that extremely clear. I don't want to be in their shoes. They get a lot of hate. They work hard hours, I'm sure, and I don't want to be in their shoes. Okay. Two, this is one of the few times I'm actually going to say that Behavior is doing a pretty good job so far, and I genuinely mean it. If you guys do watch my streams, I like to attack verbally Behavior a lot, especially if I'm losing. This was like more than 50% of the stream. You will hear me bashing for some reason or another Behavior, but this is genuinely one of the few times I think Behavior is actually doing a good job, especially if you look at the when Behavior started to now. I do think that the game is balance wise at a really good point. And yeah, so I do think Behavior is doing a good job. So the first thing I do want to say is that I think Dead by Daylight is one of the hardest, if not the hardest game to balance in the gaming industry. The reason for this is because it's asymmetrical. It's one killer, one person versus four survivors. Four people, so it's one versus four, and that in itself is a balancing nightmare because you have to balance one player versus four players, which in itself, again, it's asymmetrical. The power level is going to be harder to balance than in games like Fortnite, COD, Hearthstone, where it's usually an even playing field, and it's one versus one, or again, it's just an even playing field. So that in itself is going to cause problems. Now, because you do have these two groups, survivors and killers, survivor mains and killer mains, we go into the second problem that devs might have to consider when balancing the game, something called the us versus them mentality. Now, this is actually a psychological term, but it applies really well to Dead by Daylight. Us versus them mentality is that when you're part of a group, there is another group or anyone else who's not part of that group is a threat and is bad, right? So here in this case, you have survivor mains and you have killer mains. So survivor mains think killer mains are dumb and bad, and killer mains think survivor mains are dumb, whiny, and bad as well. Now, this is actually extremely important because anytime the devs do balance something, they're always going to get attacked. So if they do something for killer mains, or what looks like for killer mains, survivor mains will attack them and say, why are you doing this? It's not fair. This game is killer balance. And then if they do anything for survivor mains, killer mains are going to say, that's not fair. The game is survivor balance. So they're always going to get attacked no matter what. And I do think they themselves might have some biases. They might like killer mains more than survivor mains and vice versa. And that's something that they probably have to take into consideration when balancing the game. So not only do they have to take that, but they have to get their body ready for all the hate that they're going to get. Which is why I do think that on top of the asymmetry is making, Dead by Daylight just right now a really hard game to balance just in general. Now, another point that I do want to make is rank. Rank is very important. Any game that has rank actually has the same problems. How do you balance the game? Do you look at the top 1%? In this case, do you look at the red ranks and the balance the game based off of them? Do you look at the pros who are the 1% of the 1% of the red ranks? Do you balance around them? Do you balance around the new players who just come in, or even purple ranks who are like in the middle, right? Where do you balance this game? Why is this even important, right? Doesn't matter. Why should this matter? Just balance how you want, right? Well, a good example of this, and it's actually very embarrassing for me, is looking at the Doctor. So when I first started playing this game, I remember I went to this Chinese event when I was in college, and I met two other people who did play Dead by Daylight as well. Now, at this point, I only had like 10 to 20 hours in the game, and the people I was talking to, they had at least 100 to 200, and I think one person even had at that point like 1,000. So, he played, since launch. So I was talking to the person who had 1,000 hours, and Doctor came up because I think I just played against the Doctor, and he said, I was saying that the Doctor is broken. It's the most busted killer. Why is this even a thing? They really need to nerf the Doctor. And I remember him giving me this look, like, kind of like I'm crazy, or like, are we playing the same game? Are you sure you know what you're doing? And luckily, the event started, so we didn't actually talk more after that. But me, back then with my 10 to 20 hours, I knew I was right. I knew, that of course the doctor is the most broken. Maybe he just hasn't played against a doctor, even though he had like 1,000 hours in the game. So now, fast forward to now. I'm ashamed because that was my thing. And then now having reached the red ranks and rank 1 as survivor in numerous games, and numerous seasons, I now realize the kind of the error of my ways, with the experience and going against doctors now, they're kind of lackluster. And then although anyone can make a killer good, on average, doctor, in my opinion, is actually probably in need of a buff, or he is definitely one of the weaker killers out there. Now, this is actually really important because how do you balance this game? Do you balance this game based off of people who think the doctor is busted, usually, people who just came into the game? Do you nerf them? Do you nerf the doctor? Or because, they think the doctor is busted? Or do you look at the red ranks and buff the doctor because they think the doctor is in the need of a buff? This is actually extremely important, and I believe this is what they do, I'm not sure, is that they actually look at everything and maybe run tests on their own. But it's just another thing to keep in mind when they are balancing a killer. How are you going to do it? And this actually doesn't only go for killers, this also goes for perks as well. If you look at the red ranks, you will see a lot more decisive strikes, borrowed time, balanced landing, and inner strength. If you look at the lower ranks, you see a lot of self-care. Now, do you nerf the perks that are at the high ranks and buff the perks at low ranks, or vice versa? I mean, again, you have to look at rank, and devs have to decide, okay, where on this scale, how are we going to do this? And again, on top of the asymmetry, on top of the us versus them, they now have to deal with rank as well. So when you guys maybe are trying to balance the game, you got to take into account all these 3 factors. Otherwise, you might have an unbalanced game. Another important point I would like to make is that there is a big difference, especially for Dead by Daylight, other games too, but specifically Dead by Daylight, there is a big difference between consoles and PCs. The biggest example that I could give for this is Nurse. On PC, Nurse is a killer that if you just got clapped by a group of SWAT team, PhD and looping, teabagging, flashlight, blinding Claudettes, all P3, you on your favorite killer, you choose Nurse for the next game, and you put on that Omega Blink. Again, this is old Nurse, not Nurse right now. And then you clap the next survivors who are probably not in SWF, who are probably, just new to the game. But you clap them anyways because you just got clapped. Now, I mean, I have a smile on my face because I think we've all done that at a certain point. And, whether or not you are a killer main, survivor main, etc. I think we've all done that at some point. Now, based off of that, and a lot of people did complain, the devs did look at it, they did nerf the Nurse, and now that might not be a problem on PC because now the Nurse might be on an even playing field, but on console, the Nurse was already kind of a weak killer. The Nurse was not the same killer as in PC. The Nurse was not used to clap survivor team that just beat you. The Nurse, in fact, was more like a mid-tier killer. So now the Nurse getting a nerf because of the PC plays actually makes the Nurse a 10 times worse killer on console. And the main reason for this difference actually is because on PC you have a mouse and keyboard, which leads more or less for better control, while on the console you only have a controller. And if you guys know me, I do play on PC with a controller, but I am one of the exceptions, one of the few. And even then, I try, but I don't think I always am able to compete against those mouse and keyboard players, especially in other games too. But this is another scenario that devs do have to look at. If I balance something based just on solely PC, will console suffer, and vice versa? It's just another thing that they do have to keep in mind. Now, last but not least, we are going to look at teammates. I label this teammates, but it can actually also be SWFs. It's the same idea. Sometimes a perk by itself may not be broken. On paper, by itself, only one person using it, it's not broken. Good examples of this was D-Strike, Borrowed Time, and Metal Man, right? So these perks by themselves were god tier. Don't get me wrong, they're really good, but if multiple people were using them, it actually got broken. So if only one person was using it, it was fine. But now when you have an SWF or even a team of good survivors all running those same perks, it becomes unfair to the killer because it leaves for so many points for the survivors to be able to break away from the killer, extend the chase and allow everyone, if not maybe, 3 people to survive. This is, by the way, all the perks that I just said, they were recently nerfed, so they have changed. And I do believe that a lot of that balancing, what the devs did look at, was actually the fact that multiple people ran those perks, not just one person. Now, this same concept of having SWF and good teammates can also be used when not really for the devs, but when we, and I follow for this too, when we think about how to balance the game. So I know I played games before, obviously, but I played multiple games, and I just went on a winning streak, right? And I was running the same perks, so in my mind, I thought these perks were broken, right? Because obviously they're broken. I'm a decent player, but I won every single game. I won the past 5 matches with these perks, so obviously these perks are good. Right, and the same thing happens too. If you're on a team with a bunch of Blendettes who don't do anything with Urban Evasion, or Dwights who just hide in lockers, or Mags who waste pallets, or even just other teammates who just leave you to die and hook the first hook, you might be running, and this happens 4 or 5 times in a row, and you're running certain perks. You might think those perks are weak because you just lost 5 times in a row, even though it has nothing to do with them. But you might go on social media, or you might talk to your friends, or you might go on stream. I've done this before, and talk about how these perks are garbage or these perks are amazing based solely on the games that you just had, not actually on the merit of the perks themselves. And this is again something that the devs do have to consider when balancing the game, because they themselves, when they do test it, they might actually go into the same, they might have a couple games they win or a couple games they lose, and then maybe they may base it off that. So it's just something that devs do have to consider. And then so the main reason that I wanted to go through this, guys, is to show you that, and myself too, just to refresh myself as well, that there are multiple things that devs have to consider in any game, but specifically Dead by Daylight, when it comes to balancing the game. And I do think that if you do look at the history of Dead by Daylight, you do look at the past to now, I do think that the game is actually in one of the best places it's been in a long time. I don't think the game is balanced 100%. I don't think any game is balanced 100%, especially when you keep adding new characters, new perks, and new ways to customize. So there's always going to be balancing, but I do think they are at a good place. Now, I would like to hear you guys. I'd like to hear what you guys think, because you guys might agree, you guys might disagree. I might have missed some things that I haven't considered. There are some things on here that you might think that are not actually factored, and not a problem at all. I would like to hear what you guys think in the comments below.